I spent just under a decade as an intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, otherwise known as CSIS. Now, most people don't know what that is. A recent study found that less than 30% of Canadians could identify the organization responsible for investigating threats to the security of Canada. We don't often think of Canada as having spies. The Americans have Mission Impossible and Zero Dark 30 and Homeland, and the British have James Bond, and the closest we have, I think, is that 90s TV show about the Mountie due south. But even though we don't have that Hollywood cachet, CSIS does important work. And the security and safety that we enjoy in Canada certainly is not an accident. It's because every day, thousands of people in national security, law enforcement, our military, get up and do what they can to keep it that way. And CSIS is an important part of this security community. Today, I'm going to tell you what I know about Canada's intelligence service to dispel some myths, break some stereotypes, and draw some distinctions between our more well-known global cousins. So to start, let me tell you how I came to join the organization. I was a senior at Brown University in 2001, when on September 11th, the attacks happened in New York. I shortly graduated, I moved to London, England, and I was working in finance and living there when on 2005, the bombing attacks happened just down the street on July 7th. This was an age of terrorism, and I wanted to get involved. Now, I wish I could tell you a cool story that I was approached in a graduate student lounge or someone threw a sack over my head and threw me in the back of an SUV, but I am not that cool. The truth is far more pedestrian. For me, it all started with a Google search. How do I become a Canadian spy? And it took me to a government website and an online application. And what I found out about CSIS, as a researching my future employer, was CSIS was created following the FLQ crisis in Quebec in the 1970s. And there was an invocation of the War Measures Act, and a Royal Commission found that the RCMP had overstepped. So it was decided to separate the law enforcement function from the intelligence function. And thus, our domestic security service was born. Most people, when I say where I used to work, they say, oh, you must be the CIA. And I say, not exactly. The CIA is a foreign service. Canada operates domestically. Oh, then you're like the FBI. Well, no, not exactly. The FBI is a law enforcement, has law enforcement powers and can bring charges. We more closely align with the British model, the Australians, and the Israelis, which is the MI5 and MI6, ASIO and ASIS, Mossad and Shin Bet. Now, I do admit, when I first thought about it, I did envision some glamorous international travel to remote locales, and in the reality, the most exotic place I made it to for work was Windsor. So CSIS is mandated to collect, analyze, and advise government on threats to the security of Canada. And there are 4 threats, and they are espionage and sabotage, foreign influenced activities, terrorism, and subversion. And so I held my role as an intelligence officer was collection. I joke I was in the coffee and conversation business. So I would go out and knock on doors and ask people for help with my national security investigations. So there's a common misconception that if an intelligence officer approaches you that you're in trouble. But the reality is when we're following our leads and working on uncovering a threat, we're asking for people for help. We're looking for people who will help us. I used to say a good day for me is if I found somebody with threat-related information and they're willing to talk to me. And a bad day or a frustrating day was the person didn't have great information or they were not willing to talk about it. CSIS is not a clandestine organization. They say it's an organization with secrets, not a secret organization. I had a badge that had my face on it, and it had the name CSIS, and I would knock on doors, and every conversation went exactly like this. I'd say, hello, my name is Andrew, I'm here from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, I need your help with my national security investigation. I get a blank stare. I'd say, CSIS, we're Canadian spies. They said, oh, you're like the CIA. And I'd say, not exactly. CSIS was created in 1984 following an act of parliament, the FLQ crisis, and explain over and over again. Now, I will tell you, I'm happy to report that when people do find out that where I am from is legitimate, they're often happy to help. Even when I appreciate that intelligence officer knocking on your door could be a nervous or nerve-wracking experience. I mean, I would go and have a nice coffee with somebody, and we're having a delightful conversation, and we get up and I'd shake hands to say goodbye, and I realized just how nervous and sweaty and clammy I had made them. But I want you to think about this from the intelligence officer's side. Right? These are like blind dates. Only when we're going into these, we have a strong suspicion the other person does not want to see us and probably won't like us. So we do research to try to find out more about who we want to talk to, what their relationship is with the threat information, and how to approach them, like you do on any blind date. If you think about all the information we put out about ourselves in the world online, you can build a pretty decent profile, right? Where people work and all their business contacts, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, you could see who they're friends with and whose photos they're liking, and every thought they've ever had is on Twitter. But it doesn't always work. I remember one time I was tracking down an individual who it was reported had links or ties to Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And we had some information, but it was far from conclusive. And I found his ex-wife. And I thought, this is great. We're going to have someone who would likely know his views and contacts and would be willing to talk to me about it. So I went, and I knocked on her door, and I gave her my spiel, and she said, of course, come on in. And she sat down, and I sat down, and her ex-husband sat down. And I thought, okay, what are we going to talk about now for the next hour? I mean, you couldn't have given me a Facebook relationship status update? Now, it's an odd thing, we're knocking on doors, and I were able to keep some discretion. I was able to use a working name that would provide me with some protection. And to the people who knew me, I had to lie to everyone I knew about where I worked and what I did, which creates this odd situation where you're trying to build instant relationships of trust and rapport with complete strangers and totally avoiding anybody asking for help who actually knows you and you already have that relationship with. It's an odd experience doing this 20 minutes from where you live and where you grew up. Now, I learned that people think, oh, if you're a spy, you must be good at lying or really like it. But no, I hated lying, and I was terrible at it. But you realize pretty early on that the only thing worse than lying to somebody who you care about is telling them the truth and then asking them to lie for you. It's a lot to ask of your family and friends. And it leads to some awkward conversations when the people you're dating become your wife. So there are other ways that CSIS can collect information in more intrusive methods. If a subject of investigation rises to the threat level, CSIS can apply to a judge for warranted powers. And this can allow you to get access to emails, private conversations, or areas where the individual would otherwise have an expectation of privacy. But you can't just go up and say, well, the judge says I'm allowed to read your emails. Could you please hand those over? Because then they will know that they are the subject of a national security investigation. So we have a covert team that is responsible for invoking warrant powers and procuring this information covertly or clandestinely. And this team is made up of tech specialists. There are close access techs who can drill into your wall, plant a camera, cover it all up with drywall, you'd never know anything was there. There's the remote access techs who can hack into technology that's already in place. And there's a guy who picks locks. And we call him locks. And if we have to go through a door that has a lock, we bring locks along. And around this team is a security team. And I was part of this group, and that job was to make sure that the techs, the specialists, could do their jobs safely, and that our people and our technology was not compromised. The one thing you learn pretty quickly is that this is very much unlike the movies, right? Technology never works as intended. In James Bond, the cue that gives him a watch at the beginning of the movie, and at the end, the laser works exactly how it's supposed to work, exactly when it's needed, perfectly. In real life, our gear is much more purpose-built and involves a lot of negotiation. So I would say to my tech, I'd say, I want to listen to the conversation that's happening in this boardroom. And the tech would say, well, how long do I have? I'd say, you have 20 minutes. He'd say, Andrew, for 20 minutes, I can tape a walkie-talkie button down. We can put it on the table and stand in the hallway and listen. I say, well, I don't think that's very covert. Can we maybe drill into the wall? And he would say, well, Andrew, that wall is solid concrete, so it's going to take me hours to get through it, and the audio and reception will be terrible. Okay, batteries die. Equipment freezes up, and sometimes in places you cannot just hit turn off and restart. Sometimes in the spring, trees and bushes overgrow perfectly good covert surveillance video feeds. In addition to our technology, I have to tell you also, plans never go as designed, right? And I learned this lesson in my very first day of special operations. We get training to become the security team. And we had this lead trainer, he stood up in front of us who had been on hundreds of jobs, and they said, guys, we're not going to mess with you on this course. We're not going to put any arbitrary tricks or traps or roadblocks in your way. Because we know that life happens. And when it does, we don't want you to think that it was us. And we laughed. And our first night, first mission, we're supposed to break into a condo, and we're in an above-ground parking garage behind the building, and there's a narrow path that goes to the back door. And it's 3 a.m, and we're in our dark clothes, and we're feeling very sneaky. And the first person gets out of the van to go to the back door, to go into the building, and the next person gets out, takes 1 step, 2 steps, splat, right into a huge pile of dog poop. Now, you cannot break into somebody's condo and leave a trail or the smell of dog poop. So we sheepishly retreat back to our van, take the shoe off, make sure nobody saw us, and hatch a new plan. Another misconception is that, if I were to get caught, that CSIS carries weapons. We have no weapons, and I am not trained in any way in martial arts. We rely on our ability to think on our feet and our cover stories. So a cover story is basically a scenario you create in somebody's mind who may be watching you, so they don't need to come up to you and see who are you and what are you doing, that it makes sense what they see you. For example, the first time I broke into a car, locks, he told me, Andrew, I can open this door, I can turn off the alarm, but I can't stop it from going off. And when that goes off, you can't run. Because if someone's looking out their window and they see 2 guys who set up a car alarm and start sprinting away, they're going to think something's going on here. But if they look and they see me fidgeting with my keys, looking like I've accidentally bumped my car, then everything will look okay. I tell you, it is like jumping into a lake when you know it's going to be cold, and you brace yourself when you know that alarm is coming, and it takes everything in you not to run. The real intelligence officer skills are not the hand-to-hand combat. It's to remain cool, calm, collected, when everything inside of you isn't. So, what does CSIS do with all of this information that they collect? Well, there is a team of analysts that gather this information from the coffees and the wiretaps and liaising with foreign partners and open source information, and they package that together into a picture, into hopefully timely, relevant, and actionable intelligence, and provide that to government clients and partners. Now, it's important to note, CSIS advises and government decides. That's the relationship. Right? And CSIS can't tell everyone everything that they know. because our sources and our methods are top secret and have to stay that way. I wrote a book about my experience as an intelligence officer. It's called I Was Never Here. And I joked when I was broaching this to my publisher, I said, we'll make it a 2-book deal. The second book will be from prison. And everyone thought that was very funny, except for my wife. Now, the Security of Information Act is important to protect our information, our sources, and keep it all safe. But CSIS has an important role to advise, government to advise. And I think that CSIS needs to do a little bit more to let Canadians know what we're up against. We have a habit here in Canada of being complacent, right? The security that we have, the security we enjoy, our economic prosperity, it's not an evidence that we don't need security. It's an evidence that what we do, to a large extent, works. But it's not guaranteed to continue. The threats and challenges are evolving. When I joined, we were worried about terrorism and domestic attacks and foreign fighters. And now with the interconnectedness of all of us online, the cyber risk and threat is very real. Espionage and sabotage, hacking, the stealing of IP, and our research, foreign influenced activities, our deliberate misinformation campaigns happening during our elections. These are real challenges. So the final, I'd say, misconception is that you have to be an intelligence officer to help keep Canada safe. As I said, we rely very heavily on the community. There's been many times where I was having coffee and the person I was sitting across from would say, well, Andrew, you probably know this. And I would have no idea. I would say, sometimes I'd fake it to keep the mystique of CSIS. I'd say, well, I do. Yes, I do. But I want to know what you know, just so that we're on the same footing. But for the most part, I would say, no, I really don't. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you. Please tell me what I need to know. For shorthand, sometimes the CIA is referred to as the agency. And CSIS is informally called the service. And I think that's a great name, because that's what it's about. It was an organization that for a short time I was proud to be a member, serving with the help of other Canadians to keep our country safe. And so as my final act of service, I will say, if you hear from CSIS that there is a problem, please listen. And if one of my former colleagues comes to knock on your door and ask for help, please help them. I guarantee you can get them to buy the coffee. Thank you very much.